Good morning, everyone. And yes, welcome along to this rather meta-named talk about talks. What I want to do today, my goal, is to convince at least one person in the audience to think about giving a talk at a conference. Now, I remember when we started off the conference yesterday, there was a question, who's been at KCD? And there's quite a few people, it was their first KCD. So that means there's lots of people who can't have talked at a KCD. So I'm hoping by the end of this, at least one of you thinks, I could give a talk. What I want to do today is I want to talk about some of the ideas people have, some maybe misconceptions people have about conference talks. I want to talk about some of the ideas of how you can come up with a topic for a conference talk. And I want to give you some ideas of how the process works and how you can kind of work your way through it. Some stuff I got from my experience of doing conference talks. But before I do any of that, I want to sell you on the idea, right? Because I recognize not everyone's thinking to themselves, this sounds like a great idea. So I'm going to sell you on this concept, and I'm going to give you 3.5 good reasons why you should do a conference talk. The first one is you will learn things. Every time you do a conference talk, you're working out how to tell a story about something you've experienced, and you're working out how to communicate that to a whole lot of people who weren't there. And doing so makes you challenge your own assumptions on how does this actually work. Every time I write a talk, I do quite a lot of kind of technical talks, I will end up thinking to myself, you know what, do I actually understand that thing as well as I thought I did? And sometimes the answer is no, and I have to go away and do some work, and I learn things as I do it. But you won't just learn things before you give a conference talk. You will also learn things after you've finished. Because when you finish giving a conference talk and you've explained the thing you want to explain, people who have got different experience to do will ask questions. And they'll say things like, hey, have you considered doing this? Or what would happen if I tried that? And lots of times that will, at least for me anyway, that triggers new thoughts. I'm like, oh, you know what? I hadn't thought of that. That's not something that would have occurred to me. I have a talk that I actually have given quite a few times over the last year or so, and it's actually changed from when I first gave it. You could look at the video of that, and the last time I gave it. And the reason it's changed is because people had questions, and they said, you know what, have you thought about doing it this way? They've actually improved the talk. It's like a better talk now than it was when I started, because I learned things. So if you do conference talks, you will learn things about the thing you talk about. The other thing is, the next benefit, is you will meet people who are interested in the same things you are. To an extent, we get that just by being here, right? We get this by being at the conference. You get to meet people who are interested in containers and cloud native, because that's why we're all here. But if you're a speaker, that gets even better, because you get questions, right? People will think to come and ask you questions about your topic, and you get to meet them. You also get to meet your fellow speakers and conference organizers who are, unsurprisingly, interested in the same kind of things you are. And it brings me to my half a benefit. Little secret about conference speaking, sometimes they give you free food. You get speaker dinners. And speaker dinners are great because you get to meet all the people you're speaking with, and you get an opportunity to talk to them, and they feed you for free, which is awesome. So that's another benefit. You get free food. And then there's a last benefit that I think I can give some examples of, which it can help your career, right? It can be good for you to develop as people in a career in this field. Because turns out if you stand up on stage and you talk about a topic, people will assume you know something about it. Maybe not always true, but they will assume it. In a past life, I was a security consultant, and I've done quite a lot of talks around various security topics. And on more than one occasion, I've had people come up to me after the talk and say, hey, you know something about this, great, would you bid for this piece of work? So as a consultant, I've got work. I even once developed and delivered a training course off a KubeCon talk. In the early days of KubeCon, it was 2018, I did a talk on Kubernetes security. Not a lot of people were talking about it back then, so some company came up and said, hey, you know something about this, could you do training for us? Which I did, and that was really cool. It was really kind of very interesting. You can even change your whole career path by doing conference talks. So the last 2 roles I got directly as a result of having done conference talks and having written about the topic of container security. About 4 years ago, it was actually one of the other speakers who was on yesterday approached me and said, hey, Rory, you like doing talks about container security. Do you want to do that as a job? And after I got past the idea of people pay you to do talks, turns out they do, you can actually change your job. So if you want to, you really enjoy it, maybe you could even end up doing it for a living. So there are lots of benefits to doing talks, to coming up here and finding something you're interested in and telling other people about it. Before I carry on talking about talks, very brief background about me. So I did my first conference talk, I realized it was 16 years ago. It's been a little while. And I've done quite a lot of conference talks every year since then. In a stroke of complete coincidence, this is me, 16 years ago, doing a talk about web application security at Scotland on Rails 2009 in this very venue. So it's complete full circle. I came back to the same place. I gave my very first conference talk. Didn't realize that until I was looking where I was going next week. Last week. So these days, I am a senior security researcher and advocate for Datadog, which means that I basically find interesting things about container security and then tell people about them in blogs. And if you've not heard of Datadog, very brief mention is that we are an observability and security company, which is why they employ me. I also help out in the Kubernetes community on Kubernetes SIG security. And if any of the talks, either yesterday or today, like spark an interest in specifically in Kubernetes security, please do come along and join us. We're very friendly, and we meet every other week on Zoom. But let's talk a little bit more about talks. Let's talk about who gives talks. Now, you might get the idea that we're all come from the same background. We've all had some sort of special magic container talk training or just general conference talk training. But that is not true, right? There are a huge variety of different types of people who come up and give conference talks. And I personally would like to say that you become an even wider variety, because I think the more different types of people come up and give talks and explain their experience, the better. The more we'll all learn about how systems work and how people work. I started giving conference talks after I've been in IT quite a while. I had quite a long time in my career before I started doing it. Other people started at university, right? Their very first conference talk was at uni, and they enjoyed doing it, so they kept doing it. So there's lots of different backgrounds of people who give talks. It's not like you don't have to do it from when you start. Anyone can start at any time in their career. And the other thing that I think that can be an idea that people have about conference talks is that we're all one type of personality. Specifically, people might think we're all extroverts, because it sounds like a pretty extroverted thing to do this, right? Not true. Lots of conference speakers, myself included, would rank themselves as introverts. We don't typically do a lot of social stuff, but it turns out conference talking doesn't count, so it's fine. So if you are not an extrovert, do not worry, conference talking can still be for you. So I think anyone can give a talk, no matter your background, no matter your personality type. But maybe I can convince you of that. Anyone can give a talk. But what do you talk about? So the next thing I've noticed, I've had this conversation with a lot of people when I talk to them about this topic, the idea of doing conference talks. And they'll say to me, Rory, I don't have anything to talk about. That isn't true. Everybody has something which can be a conference talk. Because what a conference talk is basically telling a story. We come up here and we tell a story about our experience to a group of people who are likely to be interested in that topic. So, to give KCD as an example, a lot of us work in cloud native and containers, which is kind of why we're here. We have experienced things where we've had a problem, where we've had to do something new, where we've had to overcome a challenge. All of those things make great conference talks. And I can give two examples, because there were two brilliant examples of this yesterday at the conference. The talks from Monzo and Bailey Gifford. Both of those were stories about, in Monzo's case, about something that had gone wrong and how they overcame it, which is great. It was a really interesting talk. And Bailey Gifford's was about their journey and how they're changing their platform. If you've done something like that, you've had a project at work and you've had to go through changes, you have challenges, you have a conference talk. You could do that. And if you noticed, if you're in those talks, they got lots of questions, because people like that kind of talk, because they're probably doing the same kind of things, which is why we're all here. We're doing similar things, similar technologies. Even if it's something you're not working with, maybe you're just interested in the topic, and you have done some home research. You have learned things about conference talks as you've done that. That can be a conference talk. How did you learn it? What did you learn? What would you do differently if you tried to learn it again? All of these things can be conference talks. So there's lots of different things you can talk about, and I think genuinely everyone has something they could do a talk about. But let's just say, right, I've now convinced you. I've convinced you of the fact you want to do a talk, and I've convinced you can do a talk. How do you do it? How do you go about it? How do you get started? The first thing is, come up with an idea. Think about something, and I'm going to say, think of something that's interesting to you. Because conference talks and developing a talk is a bit of work. Don't do something boring. Because if you do something boring, you're going to hate yourself by the time, especially if you get accepted, and then you're like, oh, I'd actually have to do the work now. If it's boring, you're going to hate yourself by the time you finish. So pick something you like, something you enjoy, something you're like actively like thinking about. And then think about, who do I want to tell this story to? Who do I think would be interested in this story? Because there's lots of different groups of people. There are SREs, there are developers, there are business people, there are security people. And your story might be interesting to different groups. Then you want to find a venue, right? You want to give somewhere to give your talk. And it doesn't just have to be conferences. There are lots of user groups and meetups out there. And I would actually recommend, if you're a first-time speaker, that's a good place to start. It's a friendlier audience, it's smaller, it's somewhere that's often they're quite frequent as well, so you don't have to wait a whole year for a conference to come around. And also, a little secret about user groups. They're always looking for speakers. Every single user group I know of is always looking for new speakers. The reason I was able to give talks at a conference was I actually ran a user group for a thing called the Open Web Application Security Project back in Edinburgh in the kind of mid-2000s. And I had to give quite a lot of talks to fill in the agenda. You know, I couldn't get enough people to do speaking, so I kind of perforce ended up doing it. There is Cloud Native Edinburgh. And I did ask, and they are looking for speakers. So if you're thinking, I've got an idea, there's an opportunity for you. They meet regularly, similar kind of people to this audience, and you could give your talk there. So that's a great place to start. But you might think, well, Rory, you said conference talks, and I want to do conference talks. Now we're heading towards Halloween, fairly obviously, so let's talk about something scary, or something people think is scary. Call for papers. CFPs. If you want to do a conference talk, you almost inevitably will have to submit your talk to a call for papers. And people can get a bit intimidated about these. So I'm going to explain how they work and why you don't need to worry and don't be scared about them at all, really. So a CFP works. Essentially, it's how conferences get their talks. They put a call and then they say, here, give us the information and we'll look at doing your talk. There are lots and lots of these because there are lots of conferences and they are all different. So what you want to do is you want to identify conferences that are the kind of place you want to give your talk. There are some websites, I've linked some, I've got a resources slide at the end. There are some links there there are lots of websites that accumulate all of these now, and there are many, 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 many conferences, so there's lots of opportunities. You want to watch out for when they open their CFP, because some places will open their CFP 11 months before the conference, and then they'll close it like 9 months before the conference. As if you're on socials, you'll see people talk about KubeCon, because KubeCon does its CFPs a long way in advance. Other places, the CFP will still be open 3 weeks before the conference. I have seen that happen. That was perhaps a little bit late for them. But it's very variable. So you will get this conference, identify the one you want to speak at. Then you want to fill in the CFP. Now some of them, this is a bit weird, some of them will say, I want 100 words, right? All you can give us is 100 words. That's your abstract and that's all we want to see. Other places want like white papers. They want like learning outcomes. They want all sorts of stuff. So be a bit aware of the conference you want to submit to. They are very variable. And the thing you want to do is you want a title and an abstract at a bare minimum. And what you're doing here is selling your talk. You're selling your talk to the conference organizers. You're selling your talk to the people who are going to come and see it. Because if you looked at the program, I'm sure you have for today and for yesterday, what did you read? You read the abstract. What did you make you decide which talk to go and see? The abstract. You're selling your talk. So you want to make sure it's good and it accurately describes the story you want to tell. And at this point, it being 2025, I'm not allowed to do a talk without mentioning AI at least once. So I will. Because it turns out that LLMs are really good at writing conference talk titles and abstracts. This isn't a surprise when you think about it, because they've sucked in every successful talk and abstract that's ever been given as part of their training data. So it turns out they can spit those things out. And I'm going to say now, very clearly, do not let a LLM write your conference abstract. Because if you let it write, it will if you ask it. You could literally just say, I want to give a talk about Kubernetes modernization, give me an abstract. It totally will. Don't do it. Because that is the LLM's story. That is its experience. And if I want to know its experience, I'll ask it. I don't need to go to a conference talk. We want to hear your experiences. We want to hear what you've learned, what you've done. Now, that's not to say don't use them at all. because again, 2025, you can't avoid them. But you can use them in an intelligent and clever way. One of the things I use them for is I'll work out my abstract, I'll work out what I want to say, and then I'll give it to an LLM and say, give me some ideas for titles. I'm not great at titles, and they are. And it'll come up with some, and I generally go, yep, that one's not bad, I'll just play with it, I'll tweak it a little bit. So I'm not saying don't use them. And if there are also, you can use them to help you like polish up the words. Be a little careful with allowing it to word everything, because conference organizers are getting inundated with things generated by LLMs, and it turns out you can kind of tell by the way they write sometimes, and that can be seen as like, is this your idea, or is it the LLMs? But you can work intelligently with them to improve things. And I've actually linked a blog at the end by my colleague Whitney, who wrote the CNCF blog, an excellent in-depth guide to how you can work with them to improve your conference submissions. So you're going to submit your talk to the conference, and then you're going to wait. And you're going to wait, and you're going to wait. And sometimes you wait so long that you'll forget you submitted to the conference. I have done this. I once got accepted, and I had to ask them what it was I'd submitted, because that's the challenge of doing a lot of them. Kind of because of my job, I do quite a few of them, so sometimes I might forget what exactly I submitted to a given conference. And you'll wait for a long time, and eventually you will get the response back about whether you have been successful. And sometimes you will be rejected by the conference. Don't worry. Everyone, and I do mean everyone, who does this a lot gets rejected by conference CFPs all the time. I got rejected by 2 last month. That's fine. It's not a problem. It doesn't mean your talk was bad. What it means is they were very busy, right? They got 10 times the number of submissions as they have talk slots. They got a lot of talks on a similar topic, and they had to choose one because they can't give all the talks on the same topic because people don't want to see that. Or maybe they couldn't quite understand what your talk was trying to do. And one of the things I recommend is if you give it a put in talk submission and you don't get accepted, ask for feedback. Ask them why. Now, conference organizers are very busy, no doubt, but I've had good success, and I will ask, especially if it's a new talk I've not given before, I'll say, hey, this wasn't successful, good luck with the conference, but can you give me any feedback? Why didn't this work? And I've had very interesting feedback. Sometimes it has been literally, I didn't explain it well. I didn't make a good enough case for why my talk was something they would want to put on at their conference. Sometimes was it just a bad fit, right? This talk isn't right for this specific audience. That's fine. Just a process of saying, right, okay, there's almost another conference. This is actually a lot easier than it used to be. Now there's many, many conferences. There's conferences all over the place, all over the UK, all over Europe, all the time. Find another event, find another venue, maybe tweak up the submission. I've had a couple where I've done them 3 or 4 times. They didn't get accepted anywhere. I was like, okay, less interesting than I thought it was. That's fine. Think of another idea and submit it there. And eventually, you'll get a talk accepted. And then comes the fun part of actually designing and setting up the talk. Unfortunately, I don't have like another hour or so to go through all of that. But there are some good resources. I've linked again on the last slide. I've linked some videos by another one of my colleagues who did some good videos about how to do conference talks. There are lots of resources out there. There are lots of things you can look at that will tell you, how to do a good conference talk. But once you've got it accepted, then comes the fun part. You get to stand up here. So, conclusion. Anyone can give a talk. The more different types of people we get up on stage, the better, because the more interesting and cool experiences we will hear. Everyone has something to talk about. If you're sitting there, you do have something you could do a conference talk on. And I thoroughly hope that we will see some people from the audience on stage at next year's KCD UK. Resources are in the link. Feel free to click the QR code, and hope that's been interesting.